Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of moving from a more modern RPG, let's say 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, to an old school RPG. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I've seen a lot of videos pop up lately after the whole thing with WotC and the OGL where people are moving to the OSR. And I see a lot of people making videos helping them, which is awesome. Except I find that many of the videos kind of start off or have a major theme of, your character's gonna die. And I think that maybe that's not the best way to introduce somebody to old school games. So if you're playing 5e and you're thinking, oh man, I don't know if I want to bring my group to OSR games because they're just going to die constantly because the characters are weak, I'm going to say that's not really the case. And the games are very similar, actually, in many ways, but there are some differences in kind of play style. So for me, the old school is more than just the games itself. It's also a style of play. And I think you can incorporate some of these into whatever system you're playing. And when I was running 5th edition, I did many of these. So we're going to look at a couple of elements that exist in both 5th edition based on my experience and old school games based on my experience. And I'll talk about how they're slightly different or could be different, or maybe how an old school game might lean. This video is brought to you by me. I have a new podcast, well, kind of new, called Monsters and Treasure with K.R. King of D&D Homebrew. If you have not listened to it, go ahead, check the description below. There is a link. You guys can follow the podcast on. It's on all the normal podcatchers, if you will. We talk about a variety of different subjects, mostly gaming related, but also fantasy in general. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, check it out. So the very first thing I'm going to talk about is the story. In many of the larger modern RPGs, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, they have what are called adventure paths. And many people come into these games playing these adventures where there's kind of a story, right? There's a narrative going on and the player characters are coming in and they're expected to go through this narrative from level 1 to whatever the end of the campaign is. And the story goes along and the characters obviously make their choices. I'm not saying that they have no choice, but, you know, there's a story. You come into Barovia to kill Strahd ultimately, even though your first level, you know, ultimately that's what you're going to do, right? In an older game, the story was generally much more of what we call emergent story. That is to say that there was no narrative set up when the characters are made or when you sit down to play. There's an idea. We're playing in a world where, you know, water is scarce and there's lots of deserts and the party is scavengers for various plants that people can survive with, whatever the theme might be, right? And then from there, the characters become basically their own narrators, right? They move through the world creating a story. The story is the thing that you're talking about the next day in the chat about what happened, not kind of this ongoing thing. And you make plans, sometimes they change. And what's cool about this is it allows both the players and the Dungeon Master to kind of work together to create a world and a story. You, as Dungeon Master, are putting out lots of bits and pieces, and the players are going to grab what they like, and they're going to go that way. This helps a lot when we run into situations where people talk about, you got to make sure each session has a little bit for this kind of play, a little bit for that kind of play. But when you're running an emergent story, then the players will just do what they want. If they like a political campaign, they're going to go after all the political threads. If they like combat, they're going to go into the dungeon and fight monsters. If they like exploration, they're going to go to the unknown areas. That's just what they're going to do. That's the emergent story. So in both types of play, there's a story. Generally, in a more modern type game, there's a bit more of a narrative or a through line that starts at the beginning. And in an old school play, it's more something that you figure out, oh, wow, we've been doing this for a while. I guess that's our story as you go through. Many old school games in the old school style of play relies on what's called resource management. This is to say that resources are scarce, and part of being a player in these systems is learning how to manage those resources and using them to your best ability. This comes also, I just want to mention the thing where you hear a lot of people giving criticism to some of the more modern games that have a lot of skills where they talk about everybody's just looking at their character sheet. Well, you look at your character sheet in OSR games too. You just look at it differently. In an OSR game, your character has abilities, obviously, but they also have gear, and that's a big deal. What you have on your sheet, when you come to a door, right, or a pit, or a treasure chest, or a wall to scale, you don't look for the skill scale wall or whatever. You look for the rope or the lock picks or the hammer and chisel or a torch, right? These are the things you have, and those are basically your tools. This also includes spells. I think this becomes a big change for a lot of people. And if you come from a game that has cantrips and a lot of spells for everybody, it's going to be a little bit of a moment, because you're going to see that magic user and you hear about this a lot, that one spell. But what you've got to understand is that that spell is, we'll think of it in combat terms, that spell is artillery, right? You're a magic user with a sleep spell as a first level character can take out 10, 12 orcs in a single move with a sleep spell. Can they only do it once per session? Probably. But is that amazing? Yes. And what the magic user is there for is that. They also generally have a higher intelligence score. And if you luckily also get a high charisma, that works for you well. And that means you're going to speak more languages, you're going to know more things. And in the story of your character, that will become more important than the actual spells that you cast. So spells are a resource, your gears are resources, all of them are on your character sheet. So you still look at your character sheet in an OSR game. You just look at it differently. Okay, so speaking of that, let's talk about skills for a second. So in most games, there is a thief class, and the thief is very controversial, actually, for lots of reasons. One is that a lot of like really hardcore old school people think the thief changed D&D, and it kind of did. It was the first class that actually had skills. And some people look at the thief skills and they say, well, the thief skills are really terrible. They start with a 15% chance of picking a pocket or whatever it is at first level. That's horrible. But most people that I play with and that I've encountered have a different viewpoint on this. The thief skill is something that is almost supernatural. It is allowing you to do something that you could not do otherwise, or thwart something with a role that would otherwise take a lot of resources or time or planning, right? If the thief can move silently, they're moving silently. They get surprised, and surprise is a big deal, right? They don't get caught. They're silent. Nobody can hear them. But if anybody can move quietly, right? Because there is surprise. And if a party wants to sneak up on somebody, they can do it. If the thief has that extra skill, though, they can really do it. They're silent. They can move up on anything. And that's how you have to look at those skills, I think, to really comprehend and appreciate them properly. If you look at them like a stealth check in a modern game, it's not the same. So what about the rest of the classes? Well, most classes don't have any kind of a skill. But what you end up doing is you adjudicate things via rolls if necessary, just like any other game, when it comes up. And in an OSR game, this usually has lots of different flavors. And I really personally like this. And I think that if you embrace it, it can be really fun. Whereas if you're playing something like 5th edition or a D20 system, or a lot of systems have a set thing, Black Hack, which is an OSR game, has a set mechanic. It's always the same, right? It's like, oh, well, roll under your ability score or roll against this DC or add this bonus, which is cool because it makes the game easy to learn and real simple, right? But in a game like, let's say, BX Dungeons & Dragons, there's multiple ways to deal with things. It might be something completely random. You don't know. Is this like this? Can I do this? I'm not sure. Let's just roll a D6 and we'll say 1 or maybe 1 or 2. It succeeds. Where am I coming up with that? Well, if you look at a lot of the actions in BX, a lot of them are you roll a D6, a 1 succeeds, or a 1 or a 2 if like you have a special ability or something, like you're a dwarf and you're good at looking at stonework and stuff like that, right? So you can kind of look at that and go, oh, I'm going to adjudicate that. It's very liberating as a DM. It's also liberating as a player because you don't ever have to think, oh, I don't have acrobatics. You just describe what you want to do and we figure it out. So that's good if it's random. But now what about if you are skilled? I have high dexterity. I want to do something with acrobatics. Should it just be random? Well, this is where people use roll under your ability score. If you have a high dexterity and you pitch it properly to the DM, then they're hopefully going to let you roll under your dexterity. So you roll a d20, try to get under that 15. You got a really good chance of succeeding, right? The third way, which I use a lot less, is, and it talks about using this in many games, is just set a percentage. Can I do this? Well, there's about a 20% chance that this is going to happen. So do you want to risk it? Okay, sure. And then you roll percentile. That's pretty easy. And again, a lot of this requires a back and forth. And I think this is one thing that maybe it's hard to know until you've played a little bit. What's important, I think, in the culture of my tables that I play at is that these things aren't set in stone. When you pick up a module, there's a DC 15 chance of blah, blah, blah. That's not so much how we run OSR games, at least the people that I play with. It's more like I want to do this. And then the DM says, well, that's going to be this chance. And then the player says, well, hold on, what if I also do this? Okay, that increases it by this. Oh, can I also do this? And eventually you may actually negotiate your way to success without rolling at all. That's part of the fun of the game. Does it take you out of character a little bit? It can. And I think that the game itself lends itself to a little bit more gamey parts because a lot of OSR games are very procedural, which I'm going to talk about now. So as far as OSR games go, and this is the reason why you see a lot of people using them for solo play, they often have very good procedures. That is step by step by step of how things work. And this might seem restrictive, but in some ways it's very liberating because you understand this is the turn. At the beginning of the turn, we move down the hallway. We check for wandering monsters. We check to see if any torches went out. We listen at doors, whatever it is. You walk through the procedure. Combat also has a procedure. You declare your actions. You move. You cast spells. You do a melee, whatever. And basically, you can kind of work together as a group, knowing how these things work in order to make a more successful move as a group. So if we think about things like combat, I'm not going to go to combat yet. Let me talk about the procedures. Let me finish here. As a DM, this is fantastic because now we have a step-by-step process to run the game. It makes it very easy to do, and you can bring this style of play into any system, of course, and I've talked about this in other videos, but it's just baked into it. So if you're new and you're a little bit nervous about how to run something, you can literally just run it by the book, and eventually it will just become natural for you to do it that way. So let's talk about combat for a second. So combat is one of those areas which is really interesting. And now we're going to get into your character dies. Number one, most OSR games use group initiative, which I find is just makes the game go faster, but it also is great for people who want to work together as a team. Because an important part of combat in an OSR game is, and you'll see people talk about this, the idea of combat as war versus combat as sport. In OSR games, it's war. And in war, you do not face somebody equally, right? You plan, you maneuver, you set up so that you can come at them with an overwhelming force so that hopefully you do not take any losses. If you're in a boxing match and you're Rocky, right, you're going to sit there and punch them and they punch you and whoever can hold out to the end. That's sport. And not a sport I want to get involved in, but it's a sport, right? If you're in a war, you do not want to be standing there trading blows or shots with the enemy. You want to take them out quickly, efficiently, and with no losses. That is the mindset of these games. And part of what sets that up is that, yes, you do have low hit points, relatively speaking. Healing is slow, relatively speaking. Healing spells are rare, relatively speaking. But that's true for everyone. That means that, sure, a orc can kill your character with one hit, but you can also kill them with one hit. And you generally have better armor, better weapons, and hopefully a better strategy to take them out, right? This is basically where we're at. You have to approach it and look at it differently. Yes, your characters are not able to take multiple blows right from the first level, but the idea of avoiding that, of planning, is crucial in this kind of a game and in the combat. And I run lots of OSR games. We get to very high levels. We get lots of magical power, and that will happen. As you level up, as you get more powerful, you will see that you can kick some serious butt. So these games are not just about, guys with wooden swords that can't do anything and die constantly. They're about heroes, but heroes being born, not heroes starting that way. So there's that build-up stage. And if you are new to this and you're a brand new group and you're going to come and play something like OSE or BXD&D or any of these games, I actually recommend, people are probably not going to like this, that you start at a little bit of a higher level. Just the players are used to playing 5th edition. They're used to being a little more powerful. Let them start at 3rd or 4th level. Let them enjoy the game, see where the power is. Then once you've played a bit, say, hey, next campaign, do you guys want to feel the struggle? Get there, start at 1st level, and they probably will. And then you'll be able to kind of work your way into it. If you take somebody from a game that's used to playing a powerful character and then put them in a game where the character's not as powerful, they're probably not going to like it as much. It's just the nature of the beast. Unless they're just not liking the powerful characters, but that's a whole other story, right? My point being is that these games are very similar. You just have to look at them from a slightly different mindset. If you do want to try an old school game and you're nervous that like about the characters dying, as we talked about, or about they don't have enough spells or there's not enough skills, I recommend just trying them as they are. Go on to DriveThruRPG. There's a link in the show notes. Get the actual original basic book. It's like $5 for the PDF. Don't buy the $100 OSE deluxe set with all the extra races and spells and all that. Buy the most basic system you can. Start there. You'll see when you play the system that it's very robust, and the core of it is just really great for building any kind of campaign that you like. So I hope that you are not scared away from playing old games. I know I would be watching the videos. This is the reason why I made this, and I hope that you want to try this stuff. If you have any other questions, go ahead, put a comment below. If you are playing old school games and you agree or disagree with me, go ahead and comment below. I'd love it. Check the description below for a link to my Discord server. We have lots of rooms over there on running and playing games, so you can kind of see if you're getting into the feel. Also, there's a link to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. Another way to support the channel is just to like the video, ring the bell so you get notifications, and leave a comment. That all helps the algorithm and helps more people see these videos. I'll talk to you soon.